Theatrephonic presents No Harm Done. Written by Tom Jordan.
James Jonathan West, as I live and breathe. How the devil are you, old boy?
Elliott Hargreaves, looking very much like something the cat dragged in. I'm well, thank you. Very well, in fact. I want to say that you've never looked better, but my father always urged me to avoid lying.
Still a good little Catholic boy, are we?
Still wasting your life?
Yeah! well, what am I thinking? Sit down, old boy, sit down. Are you watered? Do you need a drink?
You mean another drink, Elliott?
Ah. Yes, of course, you've been waiting. You're wondering why I've called you here. Well, allow me to sit down and wet my whistle.
Elliott,
and...
stop. You're already making me nervous. Please tell me this has nothing to do with your position at the university.
No, of course not. Well, in time.
Elliott.
No, please, James, don't go. I'm sorry. Just please sit and listen to what I have to say, and then decide for yourself what it is you think.
Elliott, what's wrong? You're really not making any sense, old boy. Come, sit down. I'm listening.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. I appreciate your time and your support in this matter.
Matter? Please, Elliott. What's happened to your leg? Are you in trouble? It's not the bloody gambling again, is it?
No, it's something far worse.
Oh, Elliott.
James Jonathan West. The tale which I'm about to divulge to you is one that will take some listening and even more in the way of believing, but trust me when I say this. It may change your perception of the world around you and challenge your very idea of what it is to live and be human.
Elliott?
Very well then, old horse. I shall begin. Cast your mind back to last summer at the university. Do you remember?
Yes, Elliott, I remember it well.
Of course. Well, you will recall that just after the unpleasantness that heralded my departure from the institution, I decided to take a leave of absence from the city and find somewhere to recuperate.
I've often wondered where you went, Elliott.
Edinburgh. I had very little left in the way of family, but until very recent years I did keep some small contact with an estranged aunt, I think, living off the Lothian Road. Enormous townhouse apartment all to herself. Seemed as good a place as any to regroup and work out my next move.
Such a beautiful city, Edinburgh.
The funny thing is, I was in communique with the old bat all the way up past Newcastle, but when I got there...
What?
Well, neither hide nor hair of the aged spinster. I mean, her belongings were still in the place, every one. Even the damned wireless was still playing. What was the tune? So concerned was I for the woman's health that I was about to force the door when the landlord came by and produced a master key. Rushing in we went, expecting to find her in distress or at the behest of some foul intruder. And there we were, in an empty home.
She had moved out?
The landlord immediately confirmed that she'd given no notice. And there were her effects also, remember, still in place.
A fit of dementia caused her to leave her senses elsewhere and disappear into the street?
Perhaps. Either way, I took my lodgings in her spare bedroom as discussed, but she never, to my knowledge, returned.
Surely you notified the authorities? The police? Scotland Yard?
Yes, well, no. No, now you come to mention it, I didn't. I'm not for the life of me sure why.
She could have been in danger, Elliott.
I suppose she might have been. For a few weeks I came and went as I pleased. The other inhabitants of the tenement were reclusive at best, which suited me, and before long I'd begun to feel quite at home. I'd even found a local amongst the hardened lushes of Maggie Dixon's. All was rather perfect for the rest of the summer.
Perfect?
Indeed. Life ran at a leisurely snail's pace until one evening in the early autumn. The evenings had grown darker, and there was a chill in the air. A bracing Scotch wind had taken it upon itself to blow amongst the trees that evening, and I found myself hurtling at speed along the Lothian road towards what I've come to think of as my residence.
What about your aunt, man? Didn't you care? The old woman could, even all this time later, still be in mortal danger, or worse, thanks to your extensive dithering, deceased.
James, my esteemed friend, once you have allowed me to continue my tale through to its conclusion, you will have, as I, little thought, if any, for the fate of a long-forgotten face. Please.
Go on.
As I was saying, there I am, making my way at pace along the Lothian road, when, with a surprising and clamorous jolt, a man, appearing unexpectedly and seemingly from nowhere, collides sharply with my person. The two of us, I suppose, lost in our own thoughts amidst the night air. The fellow made no way of an apology, though I, being a gracious gentleman, did immediately spin on my heel to offer my regret to the man. On standing, I was unsettled to find that the other party was nowhere to be seen. I looked all about me in an instant, but there I stood alone in the street. Gathering myself inside my coat, I remedied to continue on my journey.
Not altogether unremarkable, I grant you, but the fellow could have been in a rush, perhaps, not realised his mistake and hurried himself along to his destination as you stumbled. Rude? Yes. World-altering in one's mind? I think not.
Patience, man! The encounter on the Lothian road is only the beginning.
Oh, my apologies.
No harm done. No harm done. I strode with quickened pace the short distance back to my lodgings. Not a soul did I encounter the rest of that journey home. It was as if, for the duration of those final steps, I had passed into another world. A mirror of the universe known to us, where all the buildings, streets and shadows are the same, yet there are no people. It seemed to take an age to arrive home, yet I was in truth there within an instant. On arrival, I noticed a figure moving amongst the dim light of the hallway. The landlord, perhaps, or another inhabitant of the tenement, I reckoned. Either way, by the time I'd retrieved my key from my pocket, they were gone. On entering, I first checked the post, a ritual I observed on a near-weekly basis, having precious few contacts to expect worthy correspondence from. A note from the landlord with regards to the maintenance fee was the only paper to grace my palm, and so I bundled it into my coat and made for the staircase. I had barely placed my soul upon the first step when a gruff and toneless voice accosted my ascent. "Where do you think you're going?"
I beg your pardon?
Where? No, this is no good. No, won't do it justice. Won't do it at all. Stand up.
What?
Stand up, man.
Where do you think you're going?
Yes, that's it, old boy. Yes, like that. And Scottish and crotchety.
Crotchety?
Yes, say it again, but in a Scottish accent and with a tone of aggravated irritation.
What? Why, Elliott?
Please.
Where do you think you're going?
The man before me was short, old, decrepit, maybe, gnarled, definitely. He had about his face a look of contempt that can only be worn by a person of great self-import and little regard for other human beings. He glared at me with a burning sense of indignation. Indignation that heightened greatly as a result of my attempts to meet the little man's frosty stare. "I'm sorry?"
Where do you think you're going?
"Home. To my apartment. My apologies. Hargreaves is the name."
You're no welcome here.
But I live upstairs.
You have no place here.
Now look, old boy, I'm sorry. What do you...
Out. Get out and stay gone for all your days.
With that, the odious little man was gone. He lived, I surmised from his exiting direction, on the ground floor. I shook myself from the feeling of unsettlement that the blighter had left me with and assured myself readily, as I made my way up the staircase, that on our next inevitable meeting, his living on the cusp of the entrance hall, that I would give him a good dressing down for his impertinence this evening.
You take offence too easily, Elliott. The gentleman most likely didn't recognise you and simply wanted to defend his castle. A Scotsman, I suppose, is not unlike an Englishman in that respect.
Perhaps. A gentleman, though, I think not. Anyhow, I made my way back up to my rooms and fumbled for yet another key. You can imagine my surprise when, from within my aunt's apartment, I heard that damned wireless again.
You must have left it tuned in when you went out.
Well, yes. At the time I thought as much. Despite having been adamant that it had been off at my leaving that morning. Nevertheless, I turned the thing off and went about changing into a comfortable pair of indoor slippers, lighting a few homely coals on the hearth and pouring myself a large cognac before sitting down with the previous day's copy of the Times. Well, I must have dozed off. For the next moment I found myself waking in my chair, a worn, old burgundy leather wingback that I had become quite attached to in the early days of my residence. Its usual comforts were, however, lost in this moment, as an icy draught cut its way across my forehead and right through my shirt. Strange, I thought. With the fire going, by this time in the evening, the apartment was usually insufferably warm. I rose, my newspaper falling from my lap, and turned to face the direction of the breeze. I stalled momentarily as I found myself engaged with the vision of the parlour window wide open and the floor-length drapes billowing in the wind.
Well, there's the answer to your draft. Post-summer in Edinburgh, I expect it was blowing quite a gale through an open upstairs window.
All very true. Aside from my having checked the windows before settling down for that very reason. No point, I had thought to myself, in lighting a fire to warm the place with the night air pouring in. My first fear was, of course, that an intruder had quietly forced their way in whilst I dreamt, and that even worse, they were perhaps still hidden amongst the rooms of the apartment.
What a ghastly thought. What did you do next?
I rallied myself, and picking up the fire poker, went about investigating the entire space. Once I had abated my fears, I returned to the open window and confirmed my hypothesis as ultimately erroneous by simply looking out and down. The rear garden had, in design, been dug down to the basement level. That left a sheer 3-storey climb for any would-be burglar, and surely no one could be that daring for the chance to rifle through a few old ladies' trinkets. As I leant to pull the pane to, I noticed the bright lamp of the street behind me through a gap in the 2 buildings directly to the rear of mine. There, indiscernible at the distance, stood a man cloaked in shadow, but undeniably clear from his posture, staring right at me. I closed the window post-haste, and then, as a secondary precaution, the curtains.
How chilling. Possibly an innocent fellow, out for an evening constitutional? Stopping for a breath or a smoke?
I returned to my favourite chair, seeking its cosy familiarity, and took a large gulp of brandy, my eyes focused on the fireplace, as if the sight of the flame itself might warm my frosted soul. I sat for a moment, unsure of what to do with myself. My expired copy of the Times remained in a sad heap, discarded upon the floor. My mind swimming, I thought to bend and retrieve it, looking to its pages to distract my reeling consciousness. My decision made, I began to lean forward. As I did so, with great gusto, an unseen individual or presence began to rattle the handle of my front door, not as a landlord might to request answering, but as an assailant might to break their way in. Unnerved, Now I made my way cautiously towards the threshold of my apartment. On the outside, the very essence of the knights of old, and on the inside, a small boy with fearful anticipation awaiting the sting of the schoolmaster's cane. As I approached, my eye was drawn to the handle itself, turning and fretting in its fixture, the door twisting viciously in its frame. I held out my near-shaking hand, my other poised, fingers gripped around my makeshift weapon. As I took hold of the brass doorknob, the turmoil stopped. Dead. My courage renewed, I flung open the door to apprehend my tormentor.
Good man. I hope you gave the rascal what for.
Nothing. The hallway was empty. Faced with such a disturbing anticlimax, I feared to venture little more than my head outside the fragile safety of my quarters. I can say with confidence that from staircase to staircase, there was a floor above me also, not a living creature moved.
Oh, what an awful prank to play.
I'm sorry.
Well, it's obvious, isn't it? Some young rapscallion from a family on the floor above having his merry way at your nervous expense.
The top floor was empty of occupants, my dear James, but mice and spiders.
Well then, the old man from the ground floor, playing you for a fool in revenge for your scuppering his earlier rebuke.
James, my dear fellow, you are a man mild at heart. If my tale is beginning to stretch the limitations of your sanity, I understand completely. Had I not the weight of the matter upon me, I would shy from its retelling in an instant.
Elliott,
If you need to be excused for a moment...
Elliott, please, continue. I'm fine.
Very well. My apologies.
No harm done.
No harm done. Now, where was I?
The empty hallway.
Ah, yes. Seeking in no way to draw trouble's attention and entertaining on no level the prospect of investigating any further the exposed, perilous wilderness beyond my abode, I shut the door and locked it, just in case. I returned forthwith to the sanctuary of my tattered leather friend and, scooping up my newspaper with a front of false bravado, sat, my body anything but relaxed. I glanced at the clock. On waking, I had noted, absently, the time to be midnight precisely. The time presented now upon the silver face was a mere 33 minutes past. The ordeal in its entirety had left the impression of having absorbed a prodigious portion of my existence. The stomach-turning revelation of my experience only occupying 18 minutes brought more turbulence to my mind, I could almost comment, than the unsettling passage that had preceded the calculation. I pondered for a moment this notion. In hindsight, I think, to avoid developing a preoccupation with the detail in which had been a most derailing episode. Whilst I pondered, my eyes once again began to grow heavy. I felt myself drifting into the welcome embrace of, I hoped, a dreamless sleep. As my consciousness detached itself from the waking world, the tune that had so unhappily haunted my ears earlier that evening began to wind its way back into my thoughts. Dozing, I caught myself and started with a motion of incomprehensible horror. The tune that had so subtly crept into my mind was not in my mind at all, but astonishingly crackling through the speaker of that abominable wireless once again. I rose in a desperate terror-filled fury and marched, paper still in hand, to the cabinet on which the radio stood. My courage fueled more by shame than common sense, shame at my cowardice over a series of simple coincidences. I fumbled for the control knob and switched the infernal appliance to off. Well, this seemed to anger whatever force, for in that moment it had, in my belief, very readily morphed from a series of unconnected happenstances to the workings of an unseen force, because as the dial clicked to its negative position, not only did the action cease to halt the continuation of that dreadful tune, but at that instant the door once again began to rattle with great ferocity, as though a demon of the other world were battling to smash its way toward me, while simultaneously the window and the curtains, in a hellish betrayal of my good-natured attempt to use them to shield myself from the fearful night, flung themselves open, repeating their pouring with abandon of the heady Scottish gale through the corridors of my apartment with such force that it extinguished the fire beneath the mantelpiece. The torturous cacophony that surrounded the heart of my now shattered haven rose to a tumultuous crescendo and then dissipated with a suddenness that left me reeling from the distilled silence to as level an extent as the chaos had broken my constructed resolve in the first place. I breathed for the first time in moments. My guard I had, however, surrendered too soon, for with an urgency and expressive volume there came barely a second later a knocking at my chamber door.
Hargreaves? Hargreaves, I say. Open the bloody door, Hargreaves.
Rather than perturbed by his clear annoyance, I found myself all at once nerved by the voice of a recognisable being. Moving quickly, I threw the door open, and in a behaviour most unbecoming of a modern gentleman, grabbed the man, my baffled landlord that is, and drew him into a grateful embrace. "My good man, it is a very welcome pleasure to find you at my door this night."
Look here, Hargreaves. What on earth do you think you're playing at? It's gone midnight. You can't throw yourself around the place with the wireless blaring at this hour. There's other residents to think of. Not to mention, I've got to be up early in the morning to let a potential tenant view the attic apartment.
Would you like to come in? Nightcap and a bite to eat by the fire?
Mr. Hargreaves, it's nigh on 1 a.m. I've just told you, I have to be up early in the morning.
Just the nightcap, then?
No, Mr. Hargreaves, please, I must turn in. Just keep the noise down, you hear? For all our sakes.
Yes, my apologies.
No harm done.
No harm done.
Right. Well, good night.
Yes. Good night. I closed the door once more and turned to face the night alone. My previously welcoming habitation was now unknown to me. All at once cold and empty and unfamiliar. Yet sparking in my mind with the feeling of a presence that I also now recognised, and an unwelcome crackle in the air of energies and dark possibility. Was that a faint odour of copper I detected in the atmosphere, or almost a tingle of electricity? I quickly dispatched with any prospect of lingering in the living room. That place was now filled with an unsettled aura for me. I paced my way through it, ignoring both the wretched wireless and the open window. Even my favourite old armchair held no enticement for me. I darted to the confines of my bedroom and locked myself in there until daybreak. My sleep was fitful and filled with disturbing images, the like of which I'll not share with you here, James. At moments I woke briefly and could have sworn upon my life that the hallway light which I had left on was blocked in its journey to the gap below my door by something moving on the other side of the opening. Shadows seemed to come and go as if a figure came and went, patrolling the perimeter of my boudoir.
You've given me quite a chill, Elliott. What a curious tale. The tricks one's mind will play when left to run riot late at night.
Tricks? James? Tricks?
Well, you can't possibly expect me to think that even you, with your eccentricities, believe that there are monsters and ghouls trying to force their way into your bedroom in the early hours. You're an educated man, Elliott. Have you no self-respect?
James,
Elliott.
James, I never expected you to believe anything. I simply needed to share my experiences, to take this weight from my mind.
Elliott, of course, my apologies. That outburst was unbecoming of a gentleman, of a friend. Please forgive me.
When I awoke, the lamplight from my window was still glowing amidst the darkness. Disorientated, I rose, stars instantly swimming in front of my eyes. I fell back to the bed for a moment. A thumping in my head threw itself about the inside of my skull, bringing with it a sound not unlike the conspiratorial whispering of a crowd that rung like steel through my ears. There remained a faint smell of copper in the air and a tingling across my skin, and all of a sudden my mind was clear, the headache and tinnitus gone. A weariness descended over me, and I very seriously considered putting the whole episode down to bad brandy and retiring to my chamber. At that moment, to my horror, I felt an ice-chilled hand reach out and grab my forearm. The cold was such that within an instant of its touch, my skin had begun to frostburn. In a panic, I spun round. I was alone. Wincing from the pain in my arm, I quickly gathered my coat, assembled my effects, and blustered out of my front door. My fear for the outside now outweighed greatly by my terror for what lay within. I ran, half fell down the staircase, taking 2 or 3 steps at a time, encountering no human resistance as I passed out through the hall and into the night air, where at last I took a moment to breathe. My feet finding their home firmly upon the pavement, I raised my head to observe my apartment. There, staring down at me, clear for the first time since I had observed it beneath the streetlight behind my abode, stood a shadowed figure. Featureless, yet horrible, staring undeniably down at me, stood alone on the pavement. I turned, pulling my collar about my neck, and walked without rhyme or reason in my direction, other than to put as much distance between myself and that thing as I possibly could.
Where did you go?
I walked for some time. The city was devoid of people that night, its inhabitants too well seasoned to their environment to foolishly brave the chill. Where signs of life were apparent, I was intensely cautious. I focused my eyes to the path and ignored all shapes of human figures for fear that I would lay eyes again upon that soul-shattering, empty character. It began to rain.
Bum, bum.
If you are enjoying Theatrephonic, we would really appreciate your support. By donating to our Patreon, you can help us produce more frequent episodes as well as more additional content. And by signing up to our Patreon, you will gain instant access to ad-free episodes, blooper reels, and Q&A sessions, as well as the opportunity to watch live recordings and name a character in a play. Visit patreon.com/Theatrephonic for more information. That's patreon.com/Theatrephonic to get more of what you love.
Bum, bum.
For some time, I paced the streets of the capital, The deluge beat down, but it bothered me not. My eyes were fixed upon the pavement, never daring to glance above my own line of sight for fear of catching a glimpse of that fearful phantom at another tenement window.
Surely, Elliott, you didn't wander all night. You'd have caught your death.
I've never been a religious man, as you know.
They wouldn't have you even if you were.
I thought that night on prayer. Something I'd not done since boyhood. Desperate for comforting answers, I raised my head for the first time in hours and laid my eyes, with near unsettling coincidence, upon the looming stone countenance of a church. St. Martin's? St. Mary's? I forget. The heavy wood door was closed too, yet a lighted candle flickered from somewhere beyond the blue-green of a stained glass window. I placed my palm upon the handle and with a breath and a heave pulled the door towards myself. A welcome glow and the refreshing scent of dry air spilled out into the dank night. My heart, frightful and pumping with the intention of purpose, I strode inside without missing a single step. My body felt renewed, and my mind, still swimming, was invigorated by the promised solace that this old building pressed. I passed amongst the pews and searched across the altar. Alone, I finally spied the door of a confessional hidden within a shadowed corner. All but hurdling the pews, I raced across the stone floor and flung the portal open. I entered, my breathing measured, and saw across the wooden grate the shadow of a man.
It is late, child, to be wandering the streets.
I hear. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned.
Yes.
It has been some time since my last confession.
May God the Father of all mercies help you make a good confession. Tell me, Elliott, what troubles you?
Well, Father, Wait. At this, I burst from the safety of anonymity and cast aside the door to the priest's booth to unmask who toyed with me. Nothing. Or no one, I should say.
My God.
This time I ran. Across the flagstones, out into the night, I ran, and as I did so, I witnessed now from the corners of my eyes shadows. Shadows that I had not seen before, and not the usual shadows of the night. Glaring at me from behind glass panes, shifting at the edges of rain-spoiled hedgerows, stood, faceless, beneath the incandescent glow of the street lamps at every corner.
Elliott.
I ran until my legs almost gave way beneath me, until darkness almost enveloped me.
Where did you go?
Everywhere. But nowhere. What I mean to say is that I drifted. On leaving that abominable place, I thought to leave with it the horror that had laid within. It was not to be so.
What are you saying, Elliott?
That it followed me.
It followed you?
Whatever it was that had dwelled within that building attached itself that night, or perhaps even before, to my person, to my soul. I've spent the last few months trying to stay ahead of it, trying never to let my guard down, never to sleep.
Elliott, however did you escape its grasp?
Escape? James? Oh no. I'll never escape. Not unless I give it someone new to attach itself to torment. It may have taken my aunt, James, but I am made of stronger stuff. I've made a deal, James. My time with the shadow is at an end. James. Run.
You have been listening to No Harm Done, written by Tom Jordan, directed by Danielle Lade, with Tom Jordan as Elliott and Jack Gavin as James and all other characters. Produced by Cat on a Piano Productions. For a full list of the music in this production, please see the show notes. The Theatrephonic theme tune was composed by Jackson Pentland, performed by Jackson Pentland, Mollie Fyfe-Taylor, and Emmeline Braefield. For more information about the Theatrephonic podcast, go to catonapiano.uk/Theatrephonic, tweet or Instagram us at Theatrephonic, or visit our Facebook page. If you enjoy Theatrephonic and would like to get more content, please consider becoming a patron by going to patreon.com/Theatrephonic. Please don't forget to rate and review. Thank you for listening.